Hello and welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are so glad you're here.
It's good to be back.
Usually when we do this, we've got, a stack of articles, maybe a big nonfiction book about, I don't know, history or AI.
Right, the usual stuff.
But today's, it's something completely different. We are basically stepping into a time machine.
That's a great way to put it.
We're dialing the clock back to a very specific night, a Wednesday night in 1965.
Yep, Elmira, New York.
And it's like we're pulling up a chair in this quiet back room next to this couple, Rob and Jane. And we're listening in on a conversation that, if you really let it sink in.
Oh, it completely dismantles everything.
It just pulls the floor right out from under you.
It really does. It's a total restructuring of what we even think of as real. We're looking at session 207.
Session 207.
From the early sessions. Book 5 of the Seth material.
Yeah.
And the date of record is Wednesday, November 10th, 1965.
Wow.
And, for anyone who's new to this or just wondering where all this incredible stuff comes from, we have to give full credit.
No,
This material is all preserved, and it's published by the New Awareness Network. They've done an amazing job.
they really have. And before we get totally lost in, the vibe of the 1960s, I do have to say the official part.
Go for it.
This podcast will be distributed free of charge on all major platforms for educational purposes.
Perfect.
We're here to learn, to explore, and I guess to question pretty much everything. We're not telling you what to believe, just here's what's in the documents.
And today's session is, it's a perfect example of why this material is so fascinating. It isn't just like abstract philosophy.
No.
We're going to talk about interior design tips for getting a better night's sleep.
I'm already interested.
Right. And then the actual physics of how a ghost, or what Seth calls an energy personality, literally builds a voice so you can hear it.
Okay, that's the chilling part.
And then we'll get into why your ego is basically like a bouncer at a nightclub.
A bouncer. I love it.
Yeah, a bouncer just keeping the rest of the universe from getting in.
We are definitely coming back to the bouncer. But first, let's set the scene. It's 1965, no iPhones recording this, no cloud backups.
No, it's just a pen and paper and, a lot of patience from Ruburt, Jane's husband.
So what do his notes say? What does it feel like in that room?
Well, he says it's 9:00 p.m. They're in their back room. It's quiet. And Jane Roberts, who Seth calls Ruburt, is sitting there, and she's smoking a cigarette.
See, that detail, the cigarette, it just grounds it all.
It does.
This isn't some guru on a mountaintop.
Yeah.
This is a real person in a real house, probably with, an ashtray on the table.
Exactly. It's so normal. And Rob notes that her eyes start to open, just narrowly. She starts talking really slowly at first, but then the delivery picks up speed. She goes into this classic trance state. Her voice changes, her whole manner shifts, and she becomes the conduit for Seth.
And Seth himself, just as a refresher, he calls himself an energy personality essence no longer focused in physical reality.
All right.
Which, to me, has always sounded like a very polite, very scientific way of saying ghost.
He would probably argue with that word, yeah. He really rejects the whole spooky label.
He seems to.
He frames himself much more like a teacher. Or maybe a physicist from another layer of existence. And what's so wild about this session 207, is just how technical he gets.
Right. He doesn't just say, boo, I'm here.
No. He explains the engineering behind how he's here. He's talking about energy conversion and electromagnetic fields, and even the biology of the person listening.
Okay, we have to get into that engineering. The invisible cabinets and the static sound.
We will.
But the session starts with something so strangely practical. It sounds like it's from a modern biohacking blog or something. It's about sleep.
It is. It's a very grounded way to start. He brings up an article Jane had just read in Fate magazine about something called radiesthesia.
Radiesthesia?
It's basically dowsing, sensing radiation with rods or a pendulum. But Seth just uses it as a jumping off point to repeat a piece of advice he gave them like a year before this.
Well, what was the advice?
He basically says, look, I told you this before, but you really need to sleep aligned north-south.
North-south, like your head pointing north, feet south. Is that the idea?
Generally aligned with the poles, yes. And he's really firm about it. He says, and I'm quoting here, I repeat this remark now. He points out that he told them this many sessions ago.
So is this some kind of superstition? Or like feng shui? Why would a disembodied consciousness care about how my furniture is arranged?
And that's the thing. Seth is very clear this is not superstition. He says, The reasons do indeed have to do with electromagnetic realities.
Electromagnetic reality.
He's talking about the Earth's magnetic field and how that massive field interacts with the tiny little electromagnetic field of the human body.
When you put it like that, it doesn't sound that out there.
Right.
I mean, we know birds can sense the magnetic field to navigate. It's called magnetoreception. The Earth is a giant magnet. We have iron literally in our blood.
It all connects.
So it's not a huge leap to think our bodies might have a grain, like a piece of wood, and it just works better when it's aligned with the flow.
That is a perfect analogy. If you go against the grain, you get resistance. Seth is saying that slipping north-south is the most efficient state for our bodies. It reduces that resistance.
Efficiency. So it's about minimizing the drag on the system while you're trying to recharge overnight.
Exactly. And he even hints that it's not just about sleep. He says he has future experiments in mind for them involving plants.
Plants? How so?
He suggests that if you grew plants aligned north-south versus, say, east-west, you'd actually see different growth patterns. Because of that same electromagnetic flow. He's basically teasing them with a future science fair project.
Okay, I'm literally going to get my phone out tonight.
Right.
And use the compass app. I have to check this now.
It costs nothing to try. But what's funny is he actually lets them off the hook. He says, I do not suggest them now as you are busy enough.
It's pretty considerate.
Well, it gives you this little glimpse into their dynamic. He knows they have lives. He's not a taskmaster.
Yeah.
But the core idea is still there. Our biology is constantly interacting with these huge planetary forces that we just, we totally ignore.
So the immediate takeaway for you, the listener, if you're waking up groggy, just check your bed's alignment. It's a low-stakes experiment.
Exactly. Just rotate the mattress.
Okay, so we aligned our beds. Now I want to get to the part that honestly gave me goosebumps when I was reading the transcript.
The voice.
The voice. We talk about hearing voices in a spiritual context, and it's usually a metaphor, right? Or it's like mental telepathy. But Seth breaks down the mechanics of his voice. And it sounds less like spirituality and more like audio engineering.
This is the mechanics of the voice part, and it is just fascinating. So to explain it, Seth makes a distinction between two very different ways a person can hear a non-physical sound. And he uses two examples. A man named Philip, who is also called John Bradley in the notes, and Jane herself.
Let's start with Philip. What was his experience?
So Philip had claimed he heard Seth give him some kind of warning in an earlier incident. Seth confirms, yes, that absolutely happened. But he says the way Philip heard him was totally different from how you and I are hearing each other now.
How so?
Seth says Philip heard the words clearly, from within.
From within. So not sound waves hitting his eardrum.
Exactly. No sound waves in the room. Seth says it was a translation of data. He sent a concept, a signal, and Philip's brain just decoded it into English words. It completely bypassed the ears. It was an internal, subjective thing.
Okay, that sounds like what we'd call telepathy. I think a thought, and you hear it in your head. But Jane's experience, that was different.
Radically different. And this is where it gets chilling. Seth contrasts Philip's internal experience with what happens to Jane sometimes, especially during what she called her psi-time experiments. He brings up the phenomenon of static.
Static? Just the word in this context is unsettling. It's like something in a horror movie, but he's presenting it as physics.
It is. He says that when Jane hears him directly so, not when he's speaking through her vocal cords, but when he's speaking to her, she hears a sound quite independent of herself, of static.
Like a radio that's not quite on the station.
Yes. In fact, it was so real, so physical, that on several occasions she actually got up to check if they'd left the radio on. That's how in the room the sound was.
That is terrifying. Just imagine sitting in a totally quiet room at 2 in the morning and suddenly white noise just fades in from the empty air next to you.
And then a voice forms out of that white noise. This is the physics part. Seth says, and this is a quote, "The static was the coming together of the components before the words were formed from them."
Wait, the coming together of the components. That sounds like he's assembling sound, like atom by atom, right there in the room.
That's basically what he's claiming. He says he was trying to form sound within your physical system without working through Ruburt's vocal cords, but to impress your physical system kinetically.
Kinetically. That means with motion. He is physically moving air molecules.
He's taking energy from his reality, which he describes as being at a higher frequency, and he's slowing it down, converting it. The static is the sound of that conversion. It's the friction, the energy shifting gears down into our physical system.
It's like the hum a giant transformer makes right before the power comes on.
That is a perfect image. And he says on one occasion, the voice that came out of it was extremely loud. He thinks if Rob had been there, he might have heard it too, but just as a loud whisper.
Okay, here's my problem with the physics of it. Sound spreads.
Right.
Right. If I yell in this room, the sound waves go everywhere. How does he control that?
This is where we get to the invisible cabinet.
The cabinet. Okay, explain this because this part really blew my mind.
He says he couldn't just create a noise that filled the whole room. If he did that, the energy he was using would just dissipate instantly. It takes a huge amount of energy to do this.
So we had to contain it.
He had to contain it. He describes creating a cabinet-like effect. Imagine an invisible soundproof booth just hanging in the air right next to Jane's head. His words are, "It is as if I sealed a portion of your physical system off, within which energies were concentrated and directed."
So he's what? He's like an audio engineer.
Yeah.
But from another dimension, building his own little directional speaker out of thin air.
That is a perfect way to put it, a directional speaker made of nothing. He says if he hadn't closed it off, the energy would be lost. He had to compress it to make it audible just to her.
It just completely changes how you think about the whole disembodied voice trope in ghost stories.
Right.
We think of it as just magic, but Seth is describing it like it's hard work. I have to build a containment field. I have to manage the frequency conversion. I have to deal with the static. It sounds exhausting.
It is exhausting. He says so many conditions are necessary that it does not happen often. It's an engineering problem, not a magic trick.
Which brings up the big question. If this is possible, if these entities or energies are around, why isn't it happening all the time? Why do you need a trance? Why the quiet room? What's blocking the signal at the grocery store?
Well, that's where we meet the villain of our story. Or maybe not the villain, but the gatekeeper.
The bouncer.
The bouncer. The ego.
And we should be clear. When Seth talks about the ego, he doesn't mean arrogance, like thinking you're better than everyone.
No, not at all. He means the psychological construct of I. The part of you that defines yourself as you. Separate from that chair, separate from the air, separate from me. The self.
So why is the self blocking all this stuff?
Seth's argument is that in a normal, fully ego-oriented state of consciousness, the ego's main job is to maintain a rigid electromagnetic balance.
Rigid electromagnetic balance. That sounds defensive.
It is defensive. Think of your ego like the firewall on your computer. Its job is to protect the system from being totally overwhelmed with data.
Right.
If you perceived every thought form, every overlapping reality, every stray electromagnetic signal, you couldn't function. You couldn't drive your car. You wouldn't know where your body ended and the steering wheel began.
So the ego's job is basically to say, nope, ignore that. That's not real. Just focus on the solid stuff.
Precisely. It keeps the system closed. But, Seth explains, in a trance state like Jane's, that electromagnetic aura actually changes. He says, a certain instability is set up electromagnetically that allows the individual to handle greater frequencies and ranges.
So you need that instability. You have to wobble the firewall to let new data packets through.
You have to soften the edges of the self. And Seth says these changes in the aura aren't just a feeling. They could be measured by instruments. It's a physical change in your bioelectric field.
Which implies that people who do this kind of thing, mediums or channels, they aren't just relaxing. They have physically altered their own reception capabilities.
That's the claim. And this whole conversation about the ego leads to what I think is the most mind-bending idea in the whole session. He starts comparing a dream to a chair.
Oh man, this was the part where I just had to put the book down and stare at the wall for a minute.
This is where we get into the whole hierarchy of what's real. We usually think in a binary. A chair is real. A dream is fake. End of story. And Seth says, no, that's completely wrong. They are both electromagnetic realities. The only difference between them is density.
Density.
He says, a dream, for example, again, does not have the solidity of a chair, but a dream does have reality in physical terms. It's just less materialized.
So it's like steam versus ice. They're both water. They're both real. The ice is just a lot more dense.
That's a perfect way to think about it. And he takes it even further. He says, the planets and the stars are materialized more fully than a chair.
So there's a scale. A star is like super real. A chair is regular real. A dream is like lightly real.
It's a sliding scale of electromagnetic intensity. And here's the kicker. He says, even a thought has a particular electromagnetic identity. When you think a thought, you are building a real structure. It's just so low density you can't see it with your eyes.
Let's explain telepathy then. If I build a thought structure and your firewall, your ego's down, you can perceive my thought structure just like you perceive a chair.
That's it. To Seth, telepathy isn't magic. It's just perceiving a less dense object that somebody else built.
It makes you wonder about things like hallucinations. Maybe when someone is seeing things, they're not crazy. Maybe their bouncer just walked away from the door and they're seeing the crowd of low-density stuff the rest of us are filtering out.
Seth would almost certainly argue that's exactly what's going on.
Speaking of things that are definitely not low density,
Yeah.
we have to talk about the candle.
The candle effect, yes.
This refers to something that happened a few nights before this session, on November 5th. A candle apparently moved on its own.
Telekinesis, poltergeist stuff. And in this session, Seth confirms it. He says, my candle effect was quite legitimate the other evening. He wanted to prove he could affect independent objects, not just Jane.
But there's a catch, right? And I love this detail because it's so human. He did it when she wasn't really aware of it happening.
Yes. And his reason for that connects perfectly back to our bouncer, the ego. He says, this sort of thing will almost always occur without Ruburt's conscious knowledge. And the reason is that conscious knowledge of such an effect would inhibit him.
Because if Jane knew it was about to happen, she'd get scared or excited.
It's not just the emotion, it's the effort. If Jane knew, her conscious mind would try to help. She'd stare at the candle, she'd focus, she'd strain. And Seth says that conscious effort, it would block the action.
That is so relatable. You know when you're trying to remember an actor's name?
Yes.
The harder you try, the more it slips away. And then you relax, think about something else, and boom, it pops into your head.
It's that exact principle. It's the difference between being in a flow state and being in an ego state. The ego wants to be in control. But these phenomena seem to require a total surrender of control. You have to get out of your own way.
So Seth had to sneak around Jane's ego to get the candle to move.
Don't tell the firewall what I'm about to do. Pretty much, he says, the energy used by her checking would block the action. It's a fascinating theory for why this stuff is so hard to replicate in a lab setting.
Oh, totally. The second a scientist in a lab coat tells you to move the pencil with your mind, your ego is screaming, I must move the pencil.
Yeah.
And you've already shut down the whole system.
It's a psychological observer effect. The act of observing it with the ego freezes it.
Man. So we've got audio engineering, reality blocking egos, sneaky telekinesis. But Seth isn't done. He decides to throw one more thing into session 207, a little live demonstration.
He decides to do some remote viewing. He wants to tune in on a doctor in-stream who was a contact of theirs they were sort of testing these abilities with.
And this isn't, vague horoscope language. He doesn't say, I see him struggling with a choice.
No, he gets wildly, almost absurdly specific.
Let's go through the hiss. What's the first thing he sees?
Okay, so Jane's deep in the trance. Seth pauses, and then he says Dr. Instream is not at home. He sees him walking near the water.
Okay, a visual.
He says he's with another man. He's not sure of the name, but he gets an initial. R or P.
Another detail.
Then he gets the topic of their conversation. He says they're discussing history, particularly 18th century England.
That's not something you guess. 18th century England.
And it gets more specific. He drops a name, Erickson. Then he describes an object. A small box containing pearls.
Pearls.
And he even gets the intention behind it. He thinks it's a gift, maybe for the man's wife for a birthday, and then he adds that the other guy has papers in a briefcase.
What's so interesting is the mix of data types there. He sees the water, which is visual, but he hears or knows the conversations about history, which is conceptual.
And he senses the emotion or the intent of the pearls being a gift. It's not like he's looking through a camera. He's tapping into the entire electromagnetic reality of that moment.
He's reading the metadata.
Exactly. The thought forms about history, the visual forms of the water, the emotional forms of the gift. It all goes back to that idea that everything is an electromagnetic structure. To him, the conversation about history is an object he can perceive just as clearly as the pearls.
And he's clearly confident. He's putting this all on the record so they can go back and verify it later. He's kind of showing off.
He is. Which brings us to the last part, which is just the personality of Seth. Through all this really dense physics and biology and psychic testing, He's actually funny.
He's not some doom and gloom spirit. He's got a sense of humor.
A great one. I laughed out loud at the end of the session. He calls Rob and Jane my pigeons.
My pigeons! That's amazing.
It's so affectionate and quirky, and his sign-off for the night is just classic Seth. He says, "Good night, my pigeons. I will fly away without flapping my wings, for I am a wise old bird."
I love that. I will fly away without flapping my wings. It's so playful, but it's also like a little callback to the physics we just discussed. He doesn't need wings. He doesn't operate that way. He just shifts his frequency and he's gone.
And that humor is so important. It disarms Rob and Jane. It lowers that ego firewall we were talking about. If he were terrifying, their defenses would go right up. But by being this charming, wise old bird, he keeps the channel wide open.
Okay, so we have covered a huge amount of ground from this one single hour in 1965. Let's try and distill it. What are the big takeaways from session 207?
I think there are three main pillars. The first one is the practical connection.
Right.
The idea that we are fundamentally electromagnetic beings living inside a giant magnet. And something as simple as sleeping north-south actually matters. Biology and planetary physics are not separate.
Okay, what's the second one?
The mechanics of the unseen. The idea that so-called paranormal events, hearing voices, moving objects, they aren't magic, they're just a physics we don't understand yet.
With energy conversion and invisible cabinets.
Exactly. It reframes the paranormal as just super normal. It's all part of a larger, understandable system.
And the third?
The nature of reality itself. The idea that everything we experience, chairs, stars, even our own dreams, is all made of the same stuff.
Just at different densities?
Just at different densities. And that our ego is a filter, a bouncer, designed to keep us focused on this one particular slice of the spectrum so we can survive. We're walking around with blinders on by design.
It really changes how you look at the room you're in. Is this table I'm touching solid? Or is it just a really high-density energy field that my ego has agreed to call table?
Seth would say it's an agreement, a very useful one,
Yeah.
but an agreement nonetheless.
So if this conversation has, sparked something for you listening, and believe me, we have barely scratched the surface of one session.
Out of hundreds and hundreds.
You really need to go to the source material.
Oh, you absolutely have to. Reading the raw transcripts, seeing Rob's little notes in the margins about the mood in the room, the pauses, it's a completely different experience.
So where should people go to find this?
The best place to start is the New Awareness Network. Their website and bookstore is at sethcenter.com/the early sessions.
Sethcenter.com.
And look for the early sessions. That's where all this foundational stuff is. It's just a goldmine.
Go buy the books. Support the people who are preserving this incredible archive. It is a rabbit hole you will be glad you fell down.
It really is.
So before we sign off, I want to leave our listener with one final thought to chew on, based on everything we've talked about today. The dreams being real, but less dense. What's the question we should be asking ourselves?
I think I'd ask this. If a dream has a physical reality, just like a chair, only less dense, and if every single one of your thoughts has its own electromagnetic identity, what are you building right now? As you sit here listening, what invisible structures are you creating in that less dense reality all around you? And maybe who or what might be tuning in to listen to them?
Oof. Okay. I'm going to be watching my thoughts very carefully for the rest of the day, and I'm definitely getting out my compass tonight.
North-south, don't forget.
North-south. Thank you for joining us on the deep dive. We will see you in the next reality. Good night.